Once there was a man who loved his wife, and every morning he would arise at 7 a.m., pick fresh flowers from his garden, and bring them to his wife. He'd been doing it for the last 10 years. Well, one day, the old man, he wakes up to find his grandson sitting in his kitchen, sipping coffee. He could see the look of youth in his eyes, full of anxious doubt. The old man could tell that the boy had come to him with some questions. But not one bit of urgency entered the old man's soul. He simply poured himself a cup of coffee, sat down, and asked the boy what was on his mind. That's all it took for the boy to spend the next hour just pouring his heart out to his grandfather. And the man, he listened deeply to the boy. He asked a few clarifying questions along the way, but he offered no advice. The boy told his grandfather about how the young woman he was seeing and how much he loved her and how deeply he felt about her and how much he wanted a future with her. He told him about the job he had and all the good things about it, the security, the benefits, the career path, everything. But he also told him about the path he really wanted to take, the path that few succeeded in, and how it would run contrary to the expectations everyone had around him. And ultimately, he spoke of fear that the world would soon discover the depths of his own imperfections and how unqualified and unprepared he was for the next phase of his life. Finally, the boy, he sighed, he put his head down, and he softly asked his grandfather, "What if I'm just not cut out for any of this?" It was as if the old man had just watched his grandson cut his chest open and just expose the rawness of his heart. And it made the old man so happy. Not at the stress of his grandson, he didn't like seeing that, but at the gift of being trusted with such an important moment in his life. The old man soaked it in. And the two sat together in silence for some time, until the old man, he stood up. He placed his hand on the boy's shoulder and he said, "Come with me." As they moved outside, the boy asked, "Hey, what about everything I just said?" begging the old man to give him some advice. But he didn't respond. He simply proceeded out to the garden like he did every day for the last 10 years. And in silence, he plucked the flowers from the garden he'd so meticulously kept up. He handed them to the boy one by one to hold. In silence, they drove to see the old man's wife and the boy's grandmother. And in silence, the boy placed the flowers gently on her grave. In silence, the old man knelt before the grave of his wife and gently placed a kiss on her tombstone. After a long time, the boy finally broke the silence. "You do this every day, huh?" "Every day." "Why?" "Because I'm forever ashamed that I didn't do it while she was alive." The old man turned and looked at his grandson, a boy who looked so much like him that it startled him sometimes. And tears, they welled up in his eyes, but they never fell as he spoke. "Failure," he said, "is the foolish man's fear. You will fail, and you will succeed. You will be astounded by your own inadequacies at times, but you will also be in awe at your own triumphs. That is life. But the wise man, he doesn't fear failure. The wise man fears regret. And in life, it's important to know that there's only one thing anyone ever truly regrets." Now tears fell from the old man as he turned his gaze from the boy off to the distance. "You see," he said, "I don't really regret not bringing your grandmother flowers. What I regret is being unwilling to become the kind of man who brings flowers to his wife every day." He then looked deeply into the boy's eyes. "Son, become who you could be, and all your questions, they'll take care of themselves." With that, the old man placed a hand on the boy's shoulder and started walking toward the car. And they drove off together in silence, letting the power of the moment linger with them. In this week's gospel, Jesus, he heals 10 lepers. 10 human beings receive an extraordinary gift of epic proportion. But that gift, it's something that's so much more than a physical healing. It's a physical healing that reveals what's happening on the inside. You see, every time Jesus, he heals someone in the Gospels, he isn't just trying to make them physically well. He's offering them a chance to move beyond who they are into the space of who they were made to be. What he's doing is he's opening the door to a new life and inviting them to become who they could be. And that is precisely why it's so sad and so moving and so tragic that only one of the lepers returns to give thanks to Jesus. Because only one of the lepers sees fit to be transformed on the inside. Only one of them is unsatisfied with being transformed physically. Only one of them is willing to become who they were made to be. In life, we may be healed by our ailments and we may not. Our prayers may be answered, like our deepest prayers, like the prayers that we would do anything to make a reality. They may come true and they may not. What matters infinitely more than our ailments being healed and our prayers being answered is whether or not we are willing to let God use the events of our life to draw out the fullness of who we could be. Because ultimately, that's what they're there for. Sure, one way we could look at this week's gospel is say, Jesus is telling us to be grateful. Give thanks to God as the giver of all good things, and give thanks to God for all things. And try not to be rude and selfish, because being rude and selfish are not exactly the greatest aspirations in the world, and they certainly run contrary to the gospel. But on a deeper level, the lesson is you have a choice and I have a choice. We can be the kind of person who never allows what happens to us and the events of our lives to transform us on the inside for the better. We can make that choice. But we can also make the choice to be the kind of person willing to collaborate with God in the transformation from who I am to who I was made to be. May you choose wisely.